Walk the Talk America presents mental health for firearms owners, clinicians, and the curious public. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We are trying something new with the live stream. And we're only going to find out if that worked after the fact. So I hope everybody could see and hear the intro of the music and that pretty sweet graphic that Kevin put together. I'm Jake Wiskershin. I am one of the 4 parts of the mental health of the Guns and Mental Health. I'm joined by 3 other parts: Brandon Covey, Dr. D.B. Palmer, Eddie Davenport, and then Mr. Guns himself, the most ungunned gun guy on the planet, Michael Sedini. And our esteemed, have we used esteemed yet for you, Kevin? Esteemed marketing consult person, Kevin Berry, who seems to be frozen in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, but we'll figure that out later. Our guest today is Lara Smith. Lara is one of those weirdos who's a liberal, but also a gun owner and a strident 2A advocate, thus proving that 2 seemingly mutually exclusive concepts can, in fact, exist in the same headspace. So to all those who, bag on liberals for not being gun supporters, here's your walking, talking, living, breathing example of how that's not true. In fact, that is a growing demographic among firearms owners, is the left-leaning politically, as well as women, which Lara is, and ethnic minorities too. So as our gun community continues to grow, we want to make sure it's not just a bunch of resting beard-faced white guys like you see on the screen here, but they come in all stripes and flavors. So hello, Lara. How are you? I have a lot to talk to you about today.
I'm good. And thank you all for having me on today.
It's really cool to see you. We were both up in Wyoming recently for our presentation at the University of Wyoming's law school. They were putting on a collaborative with the VA and the Department of Public Health up there. And we were really teaching about Firearms 101 and also laws, which you're going to cover because you're an attorney by trade, and firearms safety and responsible storage to prevent suicide, which is what our organization is all about. So that was really cool. It was great to hang out with you and spend some time. And Mike was up there with us too. And it was just a really good couple of weeks, even though it was at 7,220 feet, which made my head all weird because elevation sickness is a thing.
Yeah, I think it made everybody a little lightheaded and it made everything a little more difficult. But it was good to be there. And it was interesting to get to talk with everyone about all the issues that I think the firearms community doesn't talk about probably as much as we should in public and with broader audiences.
Yeah, that's just it. The audience we got, being on a college campus, first and foremost, is startling. I think we haven't had a lot of opportunities to do that. I know Mike and I went to San Jose State one time, but also the intentional invitation of this broader demographic to come in and really experience what we experience in the gun community, which is responsibility, right? So I was honored. I'm glad that you were there and you lend a great voice to that. So why don't we continue with an introduction? Tell us who you are beyond just attorney and gun-toting liberal. You also are a very outspoken person and part of a club, if you will. So please indulge us.
Yeah, so I'm the national spokesperson for a group called the Liberal Gun Club, and we are the largest left-of-center pro-2A organization in the U.S. We do a lot. We do advocacy, we do outreach, we also teach, we have a certified instructor program, and we just really try to reach out to really a broader and different demographic to say, hey, look, you can be to the left of center in the US and still enjoy firearms and still want to have firearms for all the reasons people have firearms: for self-protection, for fun, for sport, and for collecting. We have collecting groups, we have all kinds of different things. And, so we're much smaller than, some of the other national organizations, but we try to work in a space that a lot of people aren't working in. And one of the things we work on is what we call root cause mitigation, because we think that if you don't solve things that are the underlying cause of the problems, like if you aren't looking at what's causing violence, you can't solve the problem of all the violence. You can't solve gun violence, you can't solve knife violence, you can't solve domestic violence unless you're looking at all these underlying causes. And we don't think it's one cause, and we don't think there's one solution. But coming at it from the political left, we look at it as, hey, we're taking more liberal political solutions to try to solve these problems that generally aren't really looked at by politicians on either side.
I thought I saw Mike's hand twitch. Sorry, that's go on a little bit more about the what constitutes liberal, because I think that's a word that confuses people these days when we are trained by culture and society, and particularly social media and some of the maybe extra American insertion into social media to intentionally to divide us into camps that are seemingly irreconcilable. Guns and mental health, for example, is one of those. And
Right.
it's not, it's just simply not true that you have to be anti-gun if you're on the left. Help us understand that and wrap our brains around that concept.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a joke that in our group is the further left you go, you get your guns back. But for us, for liberal, yeah, but I mean, really for us, it's not the Democratic Gun Club, it's the Liberal Gun Club. I would say well north of 50% of our members are not registered Democrats. And a lot of them are people like me who are registered because I'm in a state with a closed primary. So if I want to vote in a primary, I have to pick what party's primary I'm voting in. So there's that. And then you have, but you really have people. So one of the phrases we use a lot is that what we really mean is we mean every single civil right for every single person. We want every person to have access to every right that's guaranteed to them. And so we really look at that, but we come at it from a more liberal political, a more left political standpoint. We think there's a role for government that more conservative people generally don't. We probably don't agree on like the breadth of the role of government with a lot of people who are conservative. But not so much when it comes to firearms, not when it comes to like personal rights. I mean, I think everybody in our group is very much like, no, we're very much like, we don't think the government gets to, I mean, for me, I don't want the government to control my body. And part of that is I don't want them to control my rights to self-defense.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about, because I've had the opportunity, which I'm very grateful to speak at your annual conference a few years back. I attend the conference whenever I can. This year it was in Vegas. That was great to see everybody. But for the listening audience that may be conservative or far right or say like, what the hell is this? Like, if they dropped you in the middle of that conference, you would have no idea where you were. It's the same as when gun people all get together and talk. That everybody's talking about guns, everyone's talking about rights. You know what I mean? Like, I always think it's funny when people make that judgment of the organizations, like, oh, those two things don't go together. It's like, dude, if you were dropped there, you would know no difference. You would literally think, I'm with my people. Like, we're talking about guns, like like the look, everything is exactly the same. And I don't think people know that, but I just want to make that clear to anybody listening, going, I wonder what that type of conference is like. It's a normal gun enthusiast gathering that is absolutely no different than anything else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, I mean, we do joke about this, but it's everything from Glocks to Gatling guns. We literally had GATs at the conference. I mean, we do a black powder class that has guns from the 14th century, and we do a 3-gun competition class. We do everything. And really people in this group, I think it's funny because I think to a certain extent, if you're going to be in this group as somebody on the left and like out about, oh, I have firearms, you're probably more of a traditional gun person than a lot of people on the right who are like, oh, I'm a gun guy. Yeah. Come check out all the stuff we have. And it's fun to like go out. Mike, you've been at the range with us. People will come by and be like, what's that? Like, what are you shooting? What is that? What's that configuration? What's all this? Everybody has lots of stuff. We show up with literally hundreds and hundreds of firearms when everybody shows up and everybody brings their things, and we have classes, we have we have open shoots, everybody goes and tries different things, and it's fun because you really do get this really broad group of people who are true firearms enthusiasts.
I might ask, or somebody might ask, so I'll ask it on somebody's behalf. What's the point then? Why not just join any other group? Why have the liberal tag? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear yours.
So the group actually started because we couldn't participate in a lot of the more conservative gun communities the minute anybody started talking about anything other than firearms. People would literally get thrown out of the groups. People would be abused, be told, I mean, you and I have talked about this. I get death threats, and I don't get them from people on the left for what I do. And that's the extreme. But the less extreme of that is the tribalism can be a real problem. And then we also have the group because there are people, especially in the marginalized communities that make up some of our membership, that really are not comfortable being trained by people from more traditional organizations that they feel have marginalized, have not, when there have been attacks, when there have been, you're not a real person, you don't deserve firearms because you're mentally ill because of your gender or your who you're married to, or all these reasons, where you live. When you have that come at you from in the more traditional groups, you're not comfortable with that as training, and there's no belief that that's a person who's going to keep me safe when I'm going in to do something that is already uncomfortable and a little outside the norm. And I think it's really important to think about that for a lot of people on the left, firearms, they didn't grow up, a lot of people didn't grow up with firearms in the home. They didn't grow up with firearms as a daily thing. It's not the same as, hey, I grew up hunting with my dad. We always had firearms. I learned about this as a kid. When you're coming at this as an adult, and you're coming at this because I feel like I have a threat to my personal safety, and that's the reason I'm learning this, it's a really different way to start your interaction with firearms.
Eddie.
Hey, Laura. So I haven't really interacted much with the Liberal Gun Club outside of just, I think I'm in your guys' Facebook group.
Yeah.
But I'm friends with Randy from Liberal Gun Owners. And we all know that there's multiple gun groups. Everyone has their own thing. But if you want to tell people, what's the main difference between Liberal Gun Club and Liberal Gun Owners? Like, why does one person choose the other versus one group? Or I know there's a lot of crossover, but what's the main difference between you two guys?
So Liberal Gun Owners is really Randy's group. You discussed it. We are two separate organizations. Randy's group really exists more for its main purpose is not the social organization. Its main purpose is to kind of do some more theoretical work in the firearms world. Randy's published a white paper on that, and that's kind of their main focus. Whereas Liberal Gun Club is a more traditional firearms owners membership organization. So LGO doesn't have the training programs for the public that we have. They don't have the real social aspects we have. So one of the things is, if you're a member in LGC, Liberal Gun Club, we have chapters. We have state chapters, and those state chapters get together and do shoots on a fairly regular basis, get together and have events. LGO doesn't have a structure like that. But everybody's friendly. I mean, obviously I know Randy and Adam, and they know us, and we like each other, we get along, but being two separate organizations, we're just not the same. It's not the same leadership, and we have slightly different purposes.
Yeah, I was always interested, we're kind of chatting about this being all rights for all people. I guess what I was so surprised by in the recent years, and maybe I shouldn't have been, but maybe still was the idea that, for example, Second Amendment was somehow a left or a right issue. And I was just blown away by that, particularly, as I'll just mention, like listening to NPR over the last couple of years, which I've been an NPR fan for decades, and just to watch like how quickly like this was no longer an issue of everyone being able to defend themselves, being able to be responsible for themselves, and it became a left or right concern. Maybe thoughts on like how did we lose that perspective that the Second Amendment actually protects each of us collectively and individually?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think the marketing strategy the NRA picked was a big part of it. And I think that we really have to look at what that strategy was. It was very specific to pick a demographic and go after that. So there was that. That did not help on the political side. So I was originally a member of the DC Project. I'm not anymore, but at the very beginning, I was one of the first years of that. And when we went to DC the first time, I got an appointment with then Senator Barbara Boxer's office. And to my great shock, a couple of days later, I got a phone call from Senator Feinstein's office. And the girl who ran her like policy for the Second Amendment, her firearms and safety and essentially ATF policy, called me and said, "Hey, I understand you're coming. I understand you're a liberal. Can you come meet with me too?" And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, I don't have anyone to talk to about the technical side of this because the only people I know, I'm not a gun person. If I call the NRA, they hang up on me. They won't even talk to me." And so you end up with kind of this tribalism. And then you end up with people who don't know. And then you end up with one side. I talk about this a lot in the gun world. Everybody's goal really is safety in all kinds of different levels and reduction of harms and various things. But if one side is saying to you, "Hey, you're an idiot. You hate this right. You don't deserve to have it." And the other side is saying the only way to keep your kids safe is to ban this thing. And this is what we're going to do to keep your children safe. Well, only one side's giving you the solution of how to keep your kids safe. And that's where you're going to gravitate because you don't know. And so it's really hard. I think a lot of it is this blocking of the message. And Mike and I and Jake and I have talked about this a bunch. I think one of the things we do badly in the 2A community is that we don't talk more about guns outside the idea of I have to have a gun to protect myself from some particular threat. We don't talk about guns are fun, guns are community, guns are normal, guns are an everyday part of American life, but they're also a right that other rights build off of. We don't talk about them as being part of bodily autonomy for women. We don't talk about them as being bodily safety for people with disabilities. We don't talk about them in ways that resonate with the non-gun community. And we need to do a better job of that. All of us, like everyone in the gun community needs to do a better job of that.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the marketing or the packaging of it. I remember being a teenager in the 90s when arguably the Republican Party was, kind of stronger politically in terms of votes and winning elections at that time. But I remember thinking the tactics being employed, and I was not necessarily opposed to the political stance at that time of the party,
right?
Not necessarily, but I did find that the methods being employed, I remember as a teenager thinking, this is not going to go well. Like there's going to be a time when this swings back and the same kind of tactics are going to be employed. And I don't want to be on the other side of what's being done right now. I agree with like the ideological standpoint, but I do remember like to this day, I very much recall, really being a teenager in high school and thinking this probably won't go well down the road if we keep this kind of back forth. And apparently, I would say maybe it hasn't gone well.
Yeah. And one of the things I think about politics and I talk about in politics when I go into rooms, when I go to testify, when I do that kind of thing, is I talk a lot about if your ideology is relying on othering people anybody, if that's your ideology, if your ideology is about othering, you really need to think about why you have that ideology, because maybe it's not actually based on rights.
Right. Comes right back to that idea. Can you actually have the argument and present a case rather than, well, you are a bunch of, right? And that's always the thing. Like, you're just a bunch of. Well, that's a really poor argument.
Yeah, DB,
Right.
that one of the things, and sorry, Lara, but this like popped in my head, is when the new administration took over, right? In my head, I was like, oh man, we have some people that can really get some meetings, maybe get some things accomplished. I don't have that type of power, right? I'm not NSSF and I'm not NRA, but you know, in my mind, I know Jake and I have personally pulled you into meetings to get a point across to somebody that we were cognizant enough to know, like, hey, they don't need to see it from us, right? Like maybe they need to see it from a different perspective, a different face, somebody that they can relate to, right? And it goes back to why would somebody in the firearms community, like what makes them gravitate towards your club? And I've seen it like in real time. I've watched my mom like go through your website, who's huge liberal, huge feminist, and she was like, I like this. This is something I can get. Right? Like I've actually seen it. So it exists. How do you feel? Do you feel underutilized by the community? Because I feel like you are underutilized by the 2A community. I still think we double down on the dumb shit where we just say things like, you know, oh, the liberals, da 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 da. It's like I would be like, okay, here's our people now that we're contacting. Here's our people that we're putting out there. Here's who, you know. I would make it so that you wouldn't have time to be a lawyer. I would be like, Lara, I need you on the road. Like I need you talking to all these politicians. I need you to get those meetings. What do we got to pay you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like if there was somebody, I mean, the joke, right? The joke is that I hear this all the time. I mean, people on the right say this to me all the time. Well, Soros must just be paying you. I was like, dude, if Soros was paying me, do you think I would have this other job? Like, where is the check? I'll take it. You know, I mean, yeah, I think I am underutilized, but I think we're all underutilized, right? I mean, I think that's the problem with our groups. You know, I think if we could get the funding and the time, I think we would all be doing this every minute of every day, getting out there and talking about these really, because I think WTTA is really great about this too, right? We're talking about the things that really, really matter to people, but we're not talking about the things that are easy sound bites for politicians. You know, Jake and I have talked about, I had an experience this weekend that was very, very frightening and really difficult. And talking about like, that's not something that fits either narrative, right? Like what happened this weekend doesn't fit. None of the gun laws were ever going to stop what happened. Everybody's fine. I'm not hurt. Huh? Yeah. My husband and I were in an episode of Street Violence on Friday night in Sacramento. A kid, not in a group, no yelling, no fight, unexpected. We're standing on a street corner waiting for our Uber that's a block away. A kid opened fire next to my head. Didn't hit anybody. Ran off. Happened in 5 seconds or less. Absolutely random act of street violence. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Pretty scary. I got pinged with brass. I couldn't train for it. Carrying wouldn't have helped. I'm really lucky nobody opened fire coming back at us. Like that incident, though, none of 17-year-old kid in downtown Sac, like right next to the it's called an area called Doco, so it's at the basketball stadium here. All the things we train for, that's not the episode that we trained for. That's not getting mugged. That's not somebody coming up to try to do violence to us personally, just random. But that doesn't fit the narrative, right? And all the gun laws in the world aren't going to solve the problem of whatever that kid was going through and why ever he did that. And so that's like the root cause mitigation stuff that we talk about is we're failing communities if that's happening to kids, because talking to the police, they're like, yeah, no, this is happening more, you know, and that's where we're failing, right? Like that's the stuff I want to go talk about to people is, hey, we're failing communities. We're failing our community. We're failing our country if this is what's happening to us. And you could ban every AR and get rid of every gun, and there's still going to be violence like that. It's just going to look different, but it's still going to be there because we haven't solved the problem of whatever happened to that kid to say, hey, I'm going to open fire in a crowded place with a Glock.
To piggyback off of that, I mean, that the problem with the root cause is that it's not sexy. It's not flashy, and it doesn't solve it right now. I mean, we could look at the shooting that just happened out in was it? I think it was Vegas, but out where Jake
Mhm.
lives. Um, oh, I guess actually it's more where Mike was at the university. And even though it was a handgun, first thing Biden said is, we're going to ban the AR-15s," even though an AR-15 wasn't used, but because it's sexy, it's flashy, it generates clicks. It kind of, I mean, not to pick one side or the other, but like it kind of does what the Republican model is, where like it generates the social media buzz and it's the buzzword, and it kind of like it's campaign season. We're trying to win a campaign, so politicians are going after what buzzes. Where the root cause, yes, that is exactly how we solve this, but it takes time. It takes generational change. It's kind of like the student threat assessments. It doesn't stop there is no proof that it's stopping, because the proof is nothing happened. So
Right.
it takes time.
And it's expensive. I mean, that's the other thing, is it's expensive and it's bipartisan. It has to be bipartisan, because you can't say, well, this community gets the help, but this one doesn't. It has to be broad based. It has to be working in communities that people don't want to work in, on both sides, by the way. Like, it has to be that, hey, we're actually going to go talk to the kids at church, and we're also going to go talk to the kids on the street. Like, it has to be everybody. And it's not easy, because nobody wants to work together right now, and nobody wants to talk about the stuff that's expensive and hard and doesn't get solved overnight.
Ghost Tactical dropped into the chat here. Quote, "That's one of the biggest problems we have in our society. Most people are absolutists that think if we disagree on one thing, we're enemies on all topics. It's not true. Rights are rights." And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Root cause mitigation is not politically expedient. You can't go fundraise for the next election cycle off of the idea that, hey, just stick with me for 20 years and we'll solve this, because nobody's interested in that. It doesn't fund campaigns. What funds campaigns is dazzling talk bites and sound bites and social media buzz, like Eddie alluded to. So if I can go out there and scare you, then you're going to fund my thing. And to Lara, to your point, when you're talking about going into those demographics that nobody wants to on any side, what you're really talking about is elitism and classism. And guess who occupies our political class? Elites, right? They don't want to take the time to go out and work in the streets, because that's time away from their donors. Like, I got, the listening audience can't see this, but I'm putting my hand like a half inch from my nose. I got this close to filing and running for office here in the state of Nevada. And I was so grossed out by the slimy underworld of politics that I was gonna end up compromising almost every value I possess. And so I pulled the plug, and that was a big one of them. It's like, I would rather go and work with people and teach emotional functioning and consult with governmental and non-governmental organizations than go down to Carson City and pretend that some piece of paper that gets passed and adopted into law is going to have some sweeping effect. It's not, unless you really want to like buck up some political will and like fund it thoroughly. It ain't going to do anything. And then even if you do fund it, you still need bodies to execute it. So like, you're absolutely spot on with this. I think that the many layers of the Venn diagram are lack of interest in doing the real hard work, uh, the separation of the groups as programmed into us by all the media that make money off of this stuff, as well as the entitled attitude that we can just stroke a pen and make some problem go away, knowing full well that it won't, but it will help fund the next campaign cycle, because I can point to it and say, look, I did something. I banned bump stocks or whatever it is. And it's like, you didn't do anything. Like, that didn't move the needle. This is why we got to get away from talking about mass shootings and start talking about mental health and suicide. If you want to solve quote unquote gun violence, the deaths are 2/3 self-inflicted. Like, what are we doing here?
Jake, me and you talked about this a couple of years ago, but it's that instant gratification society that we're in. I mean, we have, it's since the days of fast food through the drive-through line. We have Amazon, we have streaming. Everything is instantly right now. There is no waiting. It's the same way, like, kids aren't taught to, like, okay, anxiety and depression, these things are normal. It's okay to have these feelings. We have to solve everything right now. And with what's funny enough is that, like, our politicians are in office for 20, 30, 40 years, and like they have the time to see these things through, but they're not going to. I mean, they would rather go down to that seafood place in Washington D.C. and make their millions of dollars every morning when they're doing their fundraising, instead of actually solving stuff. Because that doesn't. There's only like 100 people in the nation that can fund their campaign. Those are the people they have to keep happy.
I think, gosh,
Yeah.
we're right in the hornet's nest of stuff here, right? I mean, as you mentioned, so the issue of dealing with this could take 20 years, which, gosh, in the span of time is nothing. We could absolutely, have an issue like this where families were stronger, communities were stronger, and if it took 20 years to accomplish that beautiful vision, what an amazing thing that would be. But Eddie, I thought your point was just comically hilarious, but realistically horrifying or tragic. But that same politician will still be in office, still railing on some petty point, or 50 years in office, or longer, and we've never taken that step because, just as everyone has said around the horn here, it's just not a sexy enough item. That we know is not going to be solved. And I guess what I find most interesting about it, and so for Laura or anyone else, we'll go with Laura. But why? Gosh, I wonder this on the conservative side all the time when we're on some other side of a tangent, and we all do this because it's, I think I'd say, human nature. Get into this team mentality versus as if like we are all impacted by this. It doesn't have to actually be a competition in this. We manufacture that. I wonder, how is it that we are so quickly swindled into the team or tribe dynamic when we all know that the elites, just as Jake said, it's actually the elites winning in this, and all of us are squabbling over some argument over our team versus their team when there's a third team winning every time.
I think that's a huge question to unpack. I mean, getting into the poli-sci of, Citizens United and funding in the US for how politics work and our insanely long election cycles. And I mean, like, there's kind of the crazy poli-sci side of that's way beyond the scope of this. But I also think people have always been tribal. I mean, that's kind of humans, right? Is that we are tribal. And in the US right now, the tribal lines are kind of on the more, macro scale, or being drawn on politics, right? This is my tribe. I have to agree with what my tribe says. I mean, look, on both sides, there's stuff that comes out that if you really think about it, like for 5 minutes, you go, that's nuts. Like, wait, they said everybody's going to double down and say, no, that's completely fine. Why? That's not completely fine. That's just hypocrisy. Like that. How is that helping somebody? Right? Like there's stuff like that comes out all the time. I mean, I live in California, right? I mean, the stuff that comes out on the left here about like, we're going to force medication on mentally ill homeless people that came out at some point. Are you kidding? Hell no. Absolutely not. No, we're not. Like, in what world is that a liberal idea? Absolutely no, right? Okay, so that's an example of it. Yeah, just no. And but it's my tribe. I have to be okay with the person saying that. And part of it is the funding system we have. There's no way to hold somebody accountable for ideas like that, right? There's no way to get rid. And then when you have the other side who says, wow, this person comes up with these crazy ideas, we're going to try a recall. And they run somebody whose ideas are equally nuts and completely offensive to people. Like, oh, well, sorry, but if you're transgender, you're going to be less than human under my governorship. Great. No, that didn't help. That's the same problem. Can we not do that? Right? Like, so you end up with this crazy no accountability because of how the structure's set up. So I think it's really a poli-sci issue, but while we have that structure in place, it's people like us, it's people doing what we do, that we just kind of have to keep working. Jake, I agree with you. I get asked all the time, why don't you run? Why don't you run for some sort of office? Because I can't do any work if I'm running for office.
Yeah,
I'd much rather do work.
For me, DB, it's neurological. This is why emotional functioning is so important to me. And on the shame guilt end of things, shame tells us that we fail to meet somebody's expectations, right? And that we're at risk of continuing to fail to meet expectations. We're going to get kicked out of the tribe. And anthropologically, human beings evolved through the Homo sapien line of hominids as opposed to Australopithecus or Neanderthal or Denisovans or any of those others, because so goes the theory. We hung together in tribes to be able to stave off things like predator attacks and climate change and so forth. So we have this hardwired in our neurological system that says if you fail to meet the tribe's expectations, you could get kicked out. If you get kicked out, you'll die. You need the tribe, therefore, right? Except we've made the mistake in recent years of thinking that everybody is the tribe, and that we'll just go red blue, right? If I'm in red, everything red is my tribe. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be. And you have to be strong enough in your personal constitution to be able to say, no, I'm not going to get on this shame guilt treadmill with you. And oh, by the way, who's the leader of the red or the blue, right? If they say something, we must all just fall into line. Yeah, because there's a threat that you'll get kicked out of your own tribe. And look, like the Democrats and Republicans are cannibalizing each other anyway because they've all become factious, right? There's like, it's so crazy to me to think that you can still be under one big tent and fighting among yourselves and not cohesive and still represent the broader tribe. Like, no, you can't. Like, so we need to have the interpersonal strength to be able to say, no, that's not what I believe in, and I don't care what you think of me. And I think honestly, there's been a major upswell of this, of people who are now considering themselves politically homeless, who go toward the nonpartisan or the the whatever that they might call themselves. And to Lara's point, the system is such that if you want to participate in the primary elections, you can't be registered nonpartisan or independent in Nevada or California or many other states. So if you want to participate in the process, pick a team, pick a tribe, and you better be lockstep with it. It's like, and so we get this feedback loop that's really just not useful. I mean, this has been a really good conversation, but one of the main reasons we've had you on is because you're an attorney by trade, and we wanted you to go over some of the legal issues related to firearms culture and obtaining guns like a 4473 and and red flag laws and ERPOs and that kind of thing. So um, I want to make sure that we put this you know to bed well. I don't want to leave anybody's opinions hanging. If there's still stuff to be said, let's do that. But I definitely want to pick Lara's brain about some of the obstacles to exercising our fundamental civil rights from a legal perspective.
Yeah, and I think part of it is both the fundamental like problems we have exercising them, and then the ones that aren't really there, but that keep people. So I think it's two-sided, right? How are we stopping people from exercising their rights? But how are we stopping people from getting help because they think they won't be able to exercise their rights, right? That there's two sides of this, and this the language on the 4473 that you're a prohibited person. Let me see if I can find it. There's kind of two that are really, really difficult for people. One is, are you an unlawful user or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? And then the other one is, have you ever been adjudicated as a mental defective, or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? And people really don't know what those two things mean and what they don't mean. And so, one of the big problems we have right now is if you use pot, you can't buy a gun, period.
Right.
It is illegal under federal law. And if you fill out the 4473 and you say, I don't use it, and you do, you've committed a felony. And if you do use it and there's medical reasons for it, and also free choice. And I mean, Jay, you and I have talked about this before. Like, do we really want to differentiate between alcohol and pot, like recreation use, all these things? What if I used to use it? What happens if I wasn't using it? I buy a firearm and now I'm using it, right? These are all the questions that people start asking. So, and then what's an unlawful user of a depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? Is it, hey, I was prescribed these pain pills to take at, I don't know, 1 pill every 8 hours, but they're not controlling my pain. So I've popped it up to 1 every 6. Am I now an unlawful user because technically I'm using them off script? What if my doctor gave me this prescription and said, hey, this is an off-label use? Is that technically an unlawful use of something if it's a narcotic? So these are the kind of things that people get into. The answer...
Let me jump in there real quick too, because when we're talking about like really getting into the weeds of the technical definitions of what is intended by the 4473 questions, the mental health one is incredibly intimidating. Have you ever been
Right.
adjudicated mentally? Right. So like, well, adjudicated, I don't know, or involuntarily committed. Like, well, I don't know. And we had Isaac Ritchie on the show, and he really took it apart. Like, he did a very good job in the realm of at least New York's law, saying this path is not. The state of New York intentionally conflated this to take my rights away. Okay. But in other states, you look at that, and if you're not in the mental health field like I am, and even some of us who are, we just don't
Right.
think like this because I don't know, I have a side project of being a geeky attorney in my, I don't know, my spare time or something. I really enjoy seminal documents and pulling things apart that don't need to be pulled apart. But it's like we have to get into the words, and we really have to parse the words. Simply putting on there mentally defective treatment broadly, it paralyzes people. Like, well, I went for couples counseling. Does that count? Because it was sort of against
Right.
my will because my wife dragged me there. Is that involuntary? And I'm not even shitting you. Like, these are conversations I've had with people. We're like, what constitutes involuntary? I'm like, well, you gotta go to the book definition. What book? Well, your state book. Nope, the federal book. Does the federal book define it? Nope. And you have to challenge this, and you don't know until you get in front of a judge, and the judge is literally going to pick up with Merriam-Webster and be like, here's the definition of involuntary, right? So we don't even know, so it just paralyzes everybody. Like, well, I guess I'm gonna say no because I've never been to a hospital. But if I've been to a hospital and I wasn't admitted, it's like we get all wrapped around the axle on the same exact issues dealing with mental health as we do with substances. So I just wanted to jump in and point that out, that it's really thorny because nobody's bothered to define terms.
Right. And what happens is the substances then connect into that mental health picture because people say, well, am I what if I have to go? What if I'm addicted? Am I addicted? What if I go get mental health treatment and they put me on an antidepressant? What if I go get mental health treatment and it turns out I have ADHD or I have something else where they put me on a stimulant? Does that mean I can't own a firearm anymore? Look at what this form says. Can I don't know if I can go do treatment, right? It's not even, am I adjudicated a mental defective? It's, oh my God, there's this list of these substances on here. Does that mean I can't have treatment?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. It does not mean you can't have treatment, but it really keeps people away. And so there's gatekeeping question number one, right? I'm afraid to get treatment because I'm afraid they're going to put me on a substance that makes me an unlawful firearms owner. Okay, 1. 2, I'm going to go get treatment. I'm in a real mental health crisis. I am a little depressed. This is not, hey, I want to go get some couples counseling. This is, I have some really serious stuff going on. I have continued suicidal ideation. I have extreme depressive syndrome. I can't get out of bed. I have all these things. I'm in a really bad place. What if they tell me I have to go to the hospital? I can't do this because I'm going to lose my firearms if they tell me I have to go to the hospital. I'm going to lose my right to ever buy another firearm in the 4473, or they're going to red flag me. So the answer to the red flag is actually much harder than the answer to the 4473. Under the 4473, if you voluntarily go into treatment, you are not, in almost every case, except really severe, very outlying cases, you will not become a prohibited person. And even just treatment's never going to be that. A prohibited person is somebody who is committed to a mental institution by a court or by some sort of panel because of some fairly severe mental illness against their will. Essentially, it is an involuntary experience. So if you are in California, it's called being 5150'd. You have somebody has a mental event. The police are called. The police say, we think this person is a danger to themselves or others. They are taken to the hospital for a 72-hour hold when there is no judge involved and there is no admittance. That is not a prohibiting factor in either California or under the 4473. However, if you
how do we know that, Lara? How do we know that? Because I don't think that's common knowledge.
There is actually a form that was put out. the prohibition is actually in 18 USC section 1922 G4. And there's the definition of this. So there's something called the Federal Register, and it has the, like, it's kind of like the operating terms of the federal laws. It kind of tells you how to know. At 27 CFR section 478.11, in 2009, the ATF actually put out a 1-page, here's the limits. And so you can kind of look at these. And then a lot of states actually have their own version of this, of this is what we mean. So if you look at the state laws about what happens under involuntary commitments, you'll find it. So this is right in New York. This is different because New York says, I think what you were talking about is that essentially the minute you're taken in under New York, that's an involuntary commitment for some period of time.
No, it's not actually. And that was the point that Isaac is making in his,
okay.
in his suit. But it sounds like it's starting to align here, though. And I didn't know that that governing doc or guiding principle existed. So that's good to know as well. So we're not just guessing at what terms mean.
We're not guessing, but even the definitions aren't great. But we do know that it really has to kick in. What really kicks in is once a judge is involved, essentially. But treatment, going to get treatment before major crisis or even in major crisis, voluntary treatment is not disqualifying. And I really want people, because I think there's so many people in all kinds of parts of the gun world. And by the way, this is a huge concern in the LGBTQIA community of if I go get treatment for all kinds of things, am I going to be committed? Am I going to be, if I go get treatment, does that disqualify me because I think I need a firearm to protect my bodily integrity? And so I think it's really important for people to know, no, you can go get treatment. You are not adjudicated as mentally defective. And can we just talk about the ableism of that term for a second? Oh my God, it's awful. The term is just like, that's not a term. Like, that's not a thing. But putting that aside, you're going to be okay if you go get treatment. And that's something that if somebody tries to take your firearms for that, that is something that can be fought. Now, ERPOs are different. ERPOs, red flag laws, are a different standard. That they are not about buying a firearm. They are about taking the firearms you already have. The 4473 doesn't affect taking the firearms you already have unless you lie on it. Different issue. Then we get into felony issues, but they have to prove that. And that's a whole different system. But ERPOs are somebody believes and claims that a person who has firearms is a danger to themselves or others. They take that claim. It depends on what state you're in. In some states, this has to be the police. In some states like California, it can be somebody who worked with you 6 months ago. Guess which side I come down on this? Neither. But like really, I want either the cops or my coworkers deciding. But there are times that we all know there are people in crisis, and the purpose behind the ERPOs is for a person who is truly in danger. It provides a mechanism for the courts very, very quickly to say, we can go in and take your firearms for a period of time so that we try to keep both you and the community safe. They are not used as often as people think they are. They are a fairly high standard to meet. But if you are what is colloquially called red flagged, it is very, very expensive to defend. So, but the interesting thing about this is who's going to red flag you. And one of the things to talk about is, do mental health providers red flag people? And Jake, I think that's probably kind of your end of this, because I think that's another place people get really worried. If I go get treatment, I can get red flagged. So,
yeah, I would
so
say
Jake, do you want?
That's a huge concern, and I know it because my phone blows up all the time, right? Or like someone sends a message to Walk the Talk America, and this is when I'm speaking to people, and sometimes people say, "Is this really a thing? Is this really happen?" I go, "Yes," because these are all anecdotal, right? Like at some point, I can't divulge, like, "Yeah, this person just contacted me the other day and is asking this question." I don't know how many times I've had someone text me literally while they're filling out the form to get a gun to do the background check. Like, what does adjudicated mean? Right? Like most people don't even know what that term is, right? So there is a lot of questions. Kevin and Jake and I were talking the other day, and Kevin asked a really good question. We were talking about CCW holders, and he says, "How many CCW holders actually follow the law?" I was like, "A lot." Believe it or not, a lot do, because they don't want to lose their CCW. So gun people tend to actually think about these things and have these concerns, and it is an issue. And when you're a non-gun person, sometimes I think you could take that for granted, right? Because you just hear like, "Oh, gun people don't care. They're irresponsible. All they want to do is arm everybody," right? And it's not true. There are a lot of thinkers that are like, "Okay, compliance, I got to do this the right way. I have this right. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize it," because it's very, very important to me.
Yeah. And
go ahead, Laura.
I was, Mike, to that, like, one of the things as a gun person, I go into lots of gun stores and just kind of shop and talk, and I'll talk to people. I'll take in a sticker or a patch, and I'll see kind of the reaction to me. Because it's really interesting with what I do, right? It gets people talking, especially like the people behind the counter, the people in the store who run the store. They'll talk about things that they don't normally kind of start talking about, right? And I will tell you, I will not buy firearms from certain stores, not because they're conservative, but because they say things that are so legally incorrect that I'm like, there's no way. I don't know what you're doing with your forms, but I don't want to be affiliated. You guys are going to end up with a problem with the ATF. I'm not dealing with this. And so, like, I think there's a problem in the gun community because almost everybody is super law abiding. And then you have the people who are like, "But I know what the law is." And it's like, whoa, no, that's not right. Let's take a step back. Like, you really, if you're going to do this, being responsible is also really knowing, like, it's nice that you want the rules to be another thing, but here's what the government thinks the rules are. Let's stay on that playing field if we're talking about like these types of interactions. And so I think it's really important in the firearms world to really talk to people. But, I've been in numerous gun stores where somebody's come in and said, "Hey," not so much in California anymore because our laws changed, but before, when we had the medical marijuana cards, "Hey, I have a card. Can I buy?" "No, you can't. Sorry." That's an automatic disqualifier. You can't, we can't sell to you while you have that card. Because we know, and it's a violation on the 4473. And so, like, I think a lot of people don't realize those conversations happen. That's the conversation that happens 99 times out of 100 is, "No, I'm sorry, I can't sell to you."
That actually happened to a family member of mine. I haven't gotten permission to give their name, so I'm not going to. But they had to make a choice between a medical marijuana card for pain management because all their pain meds they were given weren't working, and they have a lot of surgeries going on, and they didn't want to get hooked on stuff because there's just a lot of stuff that you can get like addicted to on the pain medication side. They had to make a choice between their concealed carry or medical marijuana card. And it was a hard choice. I mean, they're a woman; they have a right to, defend themselves, and it's a hard choice to actually make that stuff. And then we're talking about the 4473 stuff, and we've mentioned California, mentioned New York. I live in North Carolina, and our laws are just as screwy. Like if you get treatment, there's a chance you're losing your rights for 3 years, which is very scary, even if it was your choice. As a therapist, it's always scary for me thinking like, because granted, I work with mostly adolescents, so luckily their records are sealed at 18. So most of what I'm working with are sealed. But I always take it very seriously if I ever have to do anything involving IVC or involuntary commitment, because like I don't want anything to follow these kids for life, especially the ones that are 17, because at this point they're so close to turning 18 that what happens if something goes on that they stay in there till they're 18? Do they lose their rights for life? Which again is just fucked up in general, because like we've talked about it. I mean, years ago when I was running EMS, I was suicidal. I it is what it is. Like there's been chances where guns were against my head. We've talked to stores or people like this. Why then, when I was going through a real issue, through a real hard time, should I lose my rights for life when I was just kind of fucked up in the head, or whatever you want to look at it? I was depressed. I was anxious. I could not stand to be alive because of the trauma that I had seen, and I hadn't got the help with it. I was trying to self-medicate. Why do I need to lose my rights for life when all it took was just a couple years, a good woman, and a good therapist?
I want
Yeah.
to jump in and point out that on our CCW application for Washoe County right now, and this is different from the 4473. 4473 is the federal government decreeing that you may have permission to buy a firearm, right? Concealed carry permits are different, and they vary by county sometimes, and not to mention state. And on ours, it says it's got a bunch of questions. During the 5 years immediately preceding the date of this application, have you been committed for treatment of the abuse of alcoholic beverages in this or any other state? It's like, you know how many cops paddle alcoholism? Like, so define committed. Was that doesn't say adjudicated. So if I'm committing myself to this treatment because I realize I have an alcohol problem and I want to stop doing that, do I lose my job? Do I not get to defend myself as I see fit? Now, Nevada, fortunately, is an open carry state, which I don't necessarily advocate because I think it creates more problems than it solves. The crazy thing is that person, okay, I don't get my CCW. I can't carry under a piece of cloth now, but I can carry on my hip. It's like, who's making these rules up? And why aren't they consulting people like me and Eddie and DB and Brandon who do this for a living, who help people recover? Because when you're done with care, you're done with care. We don't do this with physical ailments. There's no question on here that says, have you ever broken your finger over the last 5 years? Isn't that a safety issue? You know what I mean? Like, we're not asking why, because presumably when your finger's done being broken, it's working again. Well, why don't we extend the same courtesy to mental health treatment? I think I know the answer, and it's largely ignorance. But I mean, this is the type of stuff we're dealing with here with these obstructions to civil rights. It's like it's just haphazard. It feels like we're doing something, and that's really all that matters, that we feel like we're doing something. Yeah, Kevin in the chat. Can't ever drive again.
I'll let Brandy go in a second, as he says he has a comment, but like one of the YouTube comments is talking about how red flag laws were used as swatting, which, being political, sending people out, like the police out to, like, because they didn't like someone, and it
Like
ended
the
up
SWAT
getting someone.
team, you mean?
Yeah,
No,
it ended
yeah,
up
okay.
getting a young man named Duncan Limp killed, and like I'm very aware who that person was. I interacted with that person online for years, and for a while I did not like police after that. It took a long time to start trusting cops again after that situation. So, Brandon, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Jake pretty much kind of said what I was going to say, but just to kind of go back what you said when you shared your story, Eddie, you're a perfect example of someone who got help and, is fine now. So, a question, I mean, I think all of us, the clinicians, have said at one point on this podcast is like, what's the point of our profession if, there's that stigma that people can't be healed? And I mean, I know we've said that a lot, but it's just, I think it's worth repeating.
And like, why is that a stigma? And like, the answer is because
Right.
it's political. Like, it's 100%
Right.
political. There is no other reason. Like, they're not consulting therapists. They're not consulting psychologists. Hell, they're not even consulting doctors. They're doing it because it's the background. It's the backdoor shadow banning. It's like where California starts banning lead ammo. Why do they do that? Because that's the easiest ones to do. Means you can't reload your own ammo. We do that with other things, and sometimes it makes sense. Like no steel. Or excuse me, like no lead ammo, like for waterfowl. Well, that's because we don't want it, like, polluting the water. I get that. That's one thing, but like no lead ammo has to be solid copper, which is extremely expensive. It's all backdoor shadow banning, and then we have like the mental health stuff is just because, again, it feels good. That's just like we're going to generate money because, hey, look, I did something. I mean, then the laws are so confusing. Like even in my own state, you have the federal laws and you have the state laws, and like where do we even go with this? Like how do you know? Like we're talking about in the chat with like Biden's son right now with the substance use and then the firearms. It is where does it even start? I think like I'm gonna let DB go on this because he's kind of an expert on this. I'm gonna let him go on it.
Well, I mean, I don't know about expert, but I mean, definitely that's the interesting piece of the Hunter Biden case related to firearms. And so I know that for both sides, we're going to air quote that for those who are on the podcast. I'm firmly air quoting this, both sides. One's looking at the Biden case from one perspective, the other from the other. And interestingly, Hunter's position in this is that on one of the charges is that it's a very interesting 2A related case, and that the original intent under Bruin is what should be moved forward. Like, was this the intent at the time? Is it related to how this might move over time? And that's the position that he's taking, is that intoxication would be an issue of carrying a firearm, not receiving treatment. That was not the original intent. And that's likely how that case will move forward. And so for those who don't like Hunter Biden, which there are a lot of those, and for those who don't like not liking him, and maybe don't want to have to like him, but are forced once again into sides on this, well, then they're in a hard spot as well, because now you need to support the Bruin case, which is problematic if you're an anti-2A person. So the challenge here is we've got to actually have a reasoned and measured response, which we don't tend to do very well. I know, Laura, you're going to hop in on this one. I'll get out of the way of this legal concern.
Well, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that the real concern with Bruin is not the firearm side of Bruin. It's the completely restructuring how the Supreme Court reads law, right? Like, Bruin to allow the overturning of Roe. It wasn't done to advance the 2A. Like, we all know where that case came from, because they had to change the framework or it wasn't going to work. But as a lawyer, the real concern for me about Bruin is not those two cases. It's, what does it mean going forward, and how do we even know? It really completely structurally changed constitutional law. And so for a lot of lawyers, they're looking at, wait, whether you're using, like for the Hunter Biden case, wow, hey, they're actually using Bruin in a way that Bruin could conceivably be narrowed to be an appropriate case for, it's meant to be used in these cases only. Great. Like, can we narrow Bruin? Because otherwise it's a huge kind of, from the lawyer side, it's not a political issue. It's a, like, how do we do this issue, right? Like, lawyers on both sides kind of went, oh my God, what is this case? And what does this mean? There was this really big, like, constitutional law just writ large about all kinds of things that don't have anything to do with firearms or abortion or any of that. And so the Hunter Biden case is really interesting for that. Is it going to narrow Bruin? Is it going to be the whoa, we're going to walk this back a little bit case? So, because it's big and high profile. So I think that case is really kind of on the legal weeds. It gets really interesting. But, there's all these little, I think it's one of the things that people forget is that case law really defines what happens with a lot of these things. So when you say, hey, we don't have the answers, the problem is, yes, sometimes we don't, because that law gets changed in the cases, and the perception of, well, this is what it means, can change over time. And that's really important to understand about these laws. Like, what are the scope? What's the appropriate scope of a red flag? We're going to start seeing more of that coming in, because there's not a ton of judicial decisions on them. Yeah, frankly, they just haven't existed long enough to really have a robust area of case law. And we're not getting it under federal law because they're state laws. So we're starting to get into all kinds of different things. So it is interesting, though, to start seeing, like, what's the law going to turn out to be on these, and where are we going? And I think it's important for firearms owners and people who want to be firearms owners to understand, like, this stuff's going to change, and it's going to evolve, especially with the Bruin decision, because that's a whole new framework. And it's just not established yet what it means.
So, Laura, we've talked a lot about the things that can make you lose your rights, and how, like, sometimes it's being abused or it's not really clear. I've never had a chance to sit down and talk with a lawyer about this, so this is my opportunity. If you have had a chance, like, say you made a mistake when you were younger, or for whatever reason you have now been deemed ineligible because of, like, the voluntary, like, one of those type of frameworks, not like a felon where you committed a murder, like, you have lost your rights. What is there a path, and then what is that path to get your rights back?
I'm going to give you the ultimate lawyer answer of, it depends. And I hate to do that, but
throw me a bone, please.
Yeah, it depends on your state. And so I can't answer that. And obviously AI can't give legal advice to a specific case because I'm not anybody's retained counsel. There's all kinds of ethics about that. But
You want a quarter?
yeah, but what you have to find out is what paths of expungement, it's called expungement, there are in your state for your particular issue. And that's going to be different depending on the type of issue you have. So, for example, a domestic violence conviction, was it a misdemeanor or was it a felony? What was it for? What exactly was the domestic violence that you engaged in? If you beat the crap out of your partner in front of the cops, you're probably not getting your rights restored, right? If you had an argument with your parents as a teenager and slammed the door and it got really heated and the police got called and the police said everybody's in trouble, maybe because that's probably going to be a misdemeanor, you don't know, but maybe there is a path of rights restoration. The one thing I'm going to tell people to be very, 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 very careful on in expungement, there are often multiple paths of expungement. This is particularly true in California. Certain paths of expungement for certain types of crimes, especially drug-related crimes where things used to be illegal and now they're not, and you are therefore seeking to have that kind of conviction, which would no longer be a conviction, expunged. Certain statutes are written specifically that you do not get rights restoration of all types of rights. You really, if you're going to do this, don't do it yourself, and make sure you call a lawyer and make sure you say to them, I want to make sure my Second Amendment rights are restored. I want to make sure my First Amendment rights are restored, depending on what state you live in, right? Because voting rights can be an issue. All kinds of rights can be an issue under these. Make sure that you're looking at, you have your list of, I care about this, because depending on the way you do it, you could unintentionally end up not getting everything back.
So the problem that we're looking at with that, though, then, is that, like, we're looking at a lot of money, a lot of time, and some of these people just don't have the resources. Again, we're looking at, you made a mistake when you were 20, like you got IVC'd, and sometimes it could be for the there was an argument, it got heated, and then it turns out you're on different substances, and for your own safety and protection, we're gonna put you in the 72-hour hold, and depending on what state you are, you've now lost your rights. And so now we're looking at a long fight to get something back that takes money and time, and it's screwed up, man. And I think we're all thinking the same thing on that one.
Yeah. So there are weirdly, the Innocence Project is a group that goes in and they do a ton of work on improv fiction. But they're a really good resource on what does expungement look like? Where do these things? There are organizations in a lot of communities. There's something called Lawyers in the Library, or your local bar association, where you can go and you can meet with a lawyer for a certain amount of time for a very either free or a very limited amount of money, like $20 for an hour. And you can call your local bar association. So the bar association is the regulating body for lawyers in your state. But a lot of times, there's local ones. So there's the San Francisco Bar Association, there's the Sacramento Bar Association, that kind of thing here. You can call them up and say, hey, I need to talk to a lawyer about this particular issue. Do you have a lawyer volunteer board? And they will send you to somebody who will talk to you about it. And you can at least find out, is there a path for me? How much would it cost? What would I have to do? If I start the process myself, can I come back just if I need some help with this form? There are ethically proper limited forms of representation in the legal world for things like that. So there are going to be some lower cost paths. They do take some work of finding them. And it's not something that I can just point you to and say, hey, call the American Bar Association. It's not how it works. It's very, very local and it's very state dependent.
I mean, how crazy that you've got to request the secret menu. I have to make sure that you say that I also want my rights back. Oh, I forgot to mention that one.
I was going to ask, because we're a bunch of mental health professionals and we're all paranoid about documentation what constitutes treatment and all that. I'm curious in your field, do you document these like free consults, these 15 minutes in the library? Like, how does that look? And then is that de facto client service? Like, how does this work?
Yes, it is de facto client service. It does create conflict questions. It's a lot of people don't do it because of that, but or a lot of people volunteer their time in an area that's not their main area of practice, right? It's not their income area of practice, so that you're not going to run into the conflict, right? But yeah, no, it does. It does create a client relationship of some sort.
Good to know. Because I think we do things like, podcasts, right? Or we write an article, and then we've been told by our professors, I've been told by my professors anyway, that if anybody reads that, they are therefore being treated, and you're treating without consent, which is just the dumbest thing ever. And so, we get all buried in the particulars that don't exist, and we are all living in fear of the people who are going to sue us that never sue us. But it's like somebody will be at a barbecue lamenting their woes about their relationship, and we clam up and we go, "Oh, I can't talk to you. I'm not on duty." And if I say, I recommend this book by Christian Conti, then I'm somehow treating you, and therefore you're my client. And now that you're my client, if you do something, then I'm on the hook for it. And it's like, no, stop it, stop it. And I just wonder if the same type of fear pervades your profession, because it doesn't seem like it does, but maybe we're the weird ones because we're always the weird ones.
No, I think it's actually in our profession, it's much more defined. Like, we actually have a pretty clear code of ethics on what is and is not a client.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah,
It's all treatment dependent, right? It's like, what is treatment? And for
right.
us, we've basically, the way that I've defined it is, did you sign a consent form? Do I have a treatment plan? Did I diagnose you? Do I have paperwork on the books? Otherwise, I can go have a burger and talk to my barber about, like, on his off day about, how his marriage is going. It's like, am I on duty at that point? And I don't think I am. But there are people in our field who would say, absolutely never, ever do that. Like, well, then
Right.
how am I helping humanity? Stop it.
Right. I mean, like, and as somebody who gets treatment, right? Like, I would say if I called you and said, "Hey, Jake, I have a question about like the functionality and what like DBT means," right? Can you like sit here and explain DBT to me? It's a type of therapy. Um, I would not consider our conversation treatment. But if I call you and say, "Hey, I really need to talk through this thing that happened. Can you take me in? I want intake. I want to be treated as a patient," then I'm your patient, right? So, like,
Right.
what is the perception? And on the legal side, there's very much the what's the perception of the person you're talking to question, which is interesting that doesn't exist for your profession. And that's one of the interesting things. It even goes to like these things with the 4473 and firearms owners, right? Like, did I get treatment? Hey, my friend's a doctor. My friend's a psychiatrist. I talked to my friend who's a family doctor because, wow, I've been having this really hard time. If I now had treatment, am I now a prohibited person? Can I even talk to my, primary care? Can I go talk to my primary care because I don't want to go to a therapist? I'm
Yeah,
not
or
saying your primary care is the person you should talk to, but like
your
all
doctor
these things
friend
come
who
in.
puts down your throat and says, looks like it's strep, you should go in. Right.
Right. Like and I think it's really confusing for people because there aren't the lines that are well drawn, and they're not drawn for the professions, right? So I think that's a really good point, that if the experts, right, if us, this is what we do, for you all mental health, for me law, if we don't know where the line is, how's the average person knowing where the line is?
Well, more podcasts. That's the answer. More
Yeah.
podcasts. But it's a nice segue into something I was going to bring up earlier, which is when we're looking at red flag laws, and I'll use Nevada because it's where I live, but it's also a carbon copy of many others. The way to red flag somebody usually falls into two camps: family or law enforcement. Family has to have reasonable suspicion that you're a risk to self or others with a firearm. They complete this form. The form goes to the judge. The judge determines from a preponderance of evidence in that application whether or not you're actually a risk and need the order issued. Law enforcement needs probable cause to fill out the same form, but the same preponderance of evidence is what the judge looks at. Now, regarding Eddie's question about rights restoration, the way you dissolve one of those orders is the aggrieved, the person who's been had the order effectuated upon him, has to demonstrate clear and convincing evidence, which is the top of the burden of proof ladder. And we don't know what clear and convincing evidence is. And to your point about case law, I asked a buddy of mine who works in the government, actually helped author this here, or at least oversaw it when he was with the legislature. The reason that we can't just go in preemptively to the legislature and say, why don't you harmonize the language at least to say, if you're going to have an order issued restricting your rights based on preponderance of evidence, why can't you just give preponderance of evidence a reasonable articulable cause that you're healthy to get your rights back? And he says, well, once it's in there, and until you challenge it in the court of law and demonstrate that it's too hard and the bar is too high, you don't have any evidence to go back to the legislature. And so far, we haven't had any of these things challenged, which I think is sad, because it is that specific thing that's keeping people from care. They're like, I don't even know how I would demonstrate, if I were red flagged, that I'm safe. And the judges don't either. So they're, New Jersey, Pirelli was talking about how they're shoulder tapping clinicians to be like, hey, can you decertify this person? We're like, I don't even know if I'm qualified to do that. Like, what am I going to do?
Right.
Interview him? Like, I have no idea. So that's a problem into itself, where you're talking about, okay, there's this really easy path to rights restriction, and the path to rights restoration is very, very challenging if you have the resources, if you even know how to define it, if you even know how to demonstrate that you're safe and secure again. So the whole thing is just mucked up. And I think it's mucked up unintentionally by people who thought they were doing good by trying to stop suicides or mass shootings or whatever. And what we ended up doing is restricting care access and making people worse because they don't want to go get care because they're afraid. DB?
Right.
I mean, does this actually take, it's a question for Laura, would this take somebody actually being red flagged, then pursuing the process, doing what they level best can to get, their right restored, then being attacked, right? And because they've attempted to do this, now they have actually been harmed. They have to be harmed, and then they have to, not die in that experience, and then they have to press an issue. I mean, is that the kind of thing that it would take to push this back for a person to actually get their case heard? I mean, how severe would it be for a person to actually have a shot at this becoming addressed?
You mean what does the party look like that could be the person that's the challenger to,
right?
What are these definitions? Like,
exactly.
Let's get some case law.
They would actually have a shot at this moving somewhere.
Right. So the legal term for this is standing, right? And it means you have to have to be the person who brings the case. You have to be the person who suffered the harm. But does the harm have to be a horrible harm? No. In this case, the harm is the law says to get my firearms back, to have my Second Amendment rights restored, to get my firearms back. And let's remember that there's actually two things going on here. There's property and there's their Second Amendment right. And those are actually different under the statutes. So let's talk about, I want the government to give me my property back. I have the right to re-own my property because it's a taking. So there's all kinds of legal things about that. I went and I followed what the law says the procedure is to get my property back, because this is a much less thorny issue. And no one would do what you said I have to do. I cannot find a provider who is willing to give the certification because it is an ethical violation of theirs to do so, right? I have now suffered the harm. It doesn't have to be some dramatic harm. The harm is I can't get somebody to give me this certification. Then you can be the person who goes and says, hey, I can't get my rights restored. And therefore this law is improper. And then you would bring the lawsuit that the law can't be enforced and that I get my rights restored because the law you can't have a law that doesn't work, essentially, is how it goes, right? The government can't just say, well, the default is we get to keep your property. That's actually not the default. The default's the other way. So that is the person. It doesn't have to be, hey, now the interesting part about this is, hey, I can't afford it, is probably not sufficient. There is a big movement in kind of the circles who talk about red flag laws and what would make these not acceptable, but better, right? That if it's a taking and if it's a public right, do we have to give a public defender? Do we have to offer some sort of like, can we be telling people that they have to spend tens of thousands of dollars? Because let me tell you, it's not cheap. I mean, even at reduced rates, lawyers are going to be like 250 to 300 bucks an hour, and that's cheap for a lawyer. It just is. And these are a lot of hours, plus time, plus you've got to find a treatment provider, plus you've got to go through all these things. So yeah, you have to have somebody who actually has the deprivation. It can't be, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose this, or I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get it back. You actually have to have not been able to get it back.
I don't do the right restoration stuff, but I am tasked in my local area of doing student threat assessments. And I had a local
Right.
one that, without getting into the weeds of it, without throwing any schools under the bus, I do not think it was handled properly. And so the issue that came about from this is the school wanted me to declare, is this kid safe to come back or not? That's kind of the point of it. Again, I don't think it was handled correctly, but they did not like the fact that I said that due to insufficient evidence, there is no way to say if the kid is or is not a threat to themselves. Then I gave a small caveat of why they may not be. And then they gave a suggestion of how you can find out more information. And this is me dealing with a kid, not with a red flag wall. And then as like with people trying to find providers, it is, people are wondering why providers don't want to do that. Because like, even if I was to say, when I do say kids do not show the evidence, I say at this present time. And that's, I mean, it's what we do with all of our stuff. At this present time, this person is not showing this situation, this diagnosis, whatever. And because like we cannot predict the future, and that's not us trying to be like get out of jail free cards. That's just we look at a person in this present moment, and like a lot of these laws want us to predict the future and not just
Project
in this
out, right.
present moment. And like no one's going to put their name on that, because like I can't predict the future, and I'm not trying to like not help you if you're right. It's just I can say what you're presenting in this moment, and the laws are not written in a way where that is sufficient.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about this too, though? I could totally see the other side where the dilemma is for all the clinicians here. How many times have we heard like someone should have taken that person's rights away? But then on the flip side of that, you have to make a judgment call of ruining someone's life, or maybe a judgment call of, I could really crush this kid if I don't let him go back into normal society. Like the message we're sending to this kid is you suck, right? Like, or you're not fit. So I actually can I actually can defend sometimes when people let stuff slide, because I'm sure a lot of clinicians or people in healthcare are like, I don't want to be responsible for turning someone's life upside down. My resolve isn't so much like I am the end all be all and I'm right every time, right? So I can see where this becomes a massive dilemma. You don't want to let somebody through that's not ready, but at the same time, you got to weigh out: am I screwing someone's life up?
And that comes up a lot with me when I'm working with my kids, because like it's a lot of the stuff kids I'm working with are in group homes and stuff. So like again, this isn't a gun rights thing, but like it's to your point that is it's my name. So one, I'm kind of like, I'm gonna defend my name, and because I have a reputation. So if I put it out there, people trust that name, and I don't want them not to trust that name. But is my recommendation going to screw this kid up? So do I give them leniency or do I not give them leniency? And the same thing with like the gun rights. Do I take this person's rights away forever? Let's look at the shooting that happened. I don't know. There's so many, but like we always hear they were in mental health treatment sometimes, or X and stuff. And then like people are like, why didn't they have their guns taken? Like to Mike's point, at that time, were they really like crazy or whatever word you want to use? Like, do we take this person's rights away forever because they are seeking treatment? And these laws do not take that into account.
No, they
Right.
don't, and they also don't take into account the impulsivity. Not everything's a planned event over months at a time with all the telltale signs, right? In fact, very, very, very few usually are. And I think back to my own childhood, like when I actually fought back against bullies, it was like a flash in a moment, right? Like I didn't sit there and like plot out that I was gonna like stalk the kid. He just like pushed, pushed, pushed. Finally, I turn around and decked him. So
Yeah.
if you extrapolate that, you go there. We're not living in Minority Report here. There is no way to do this. Everybody wants to. Again, I'll go back to feelings. Feels like we can do something. Feels like we can control others. Feels like we can predict the future. Logic doesn't work that way. What we need to do, to Lara's point, it kicked off this whole thing, is go back to root cause mitigation. Why is the kid getting bullied in the first place? Why is the family broken in the first place? Where is dad? We could throw all the treatment and resources we want at somebody, and that all, by the way, presumes that there's a mental health issue, and oftentimes there isn't. But unless we actually embrace the idea that this is just violence expressed in a different form than we would prefer, we're not going to get anywhere with all the control measures and the insertion of authorities into people's private lives. It's just not working. It's not effective. It's not empirical. Nobody studied it. There is no research. It's just all somebody's idea. And then we're back into the push pull of like whether or not it's a good idea or whether or not it's effective. And where
Right.
this organization lands on it. It's education over restriction.
Right. And I mean, this is one of the big things about red flag laws, right? Is that I think a ton of people don't realize that if you get red flagged, there's no treatment. There's no treatment requirement ever, right?
No,
like
it's
the
just
state doesn't
clearing
have to
convincing
provide you
evidence.
treatment. It's are you a threat right now to yourself or others to the point that the government can come in and do a taking? That's what that law is about. But there's no, okay, well, you have this period of time. These don't have a treatment component to them. Like, I think a lot more people would be like, oh, so there's some, I think people think, oh, these are great because it's helping people get mental health. It does the exact opposite.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anything, we're dealing with symptoms, not problems. So the symptom is the impulsivity of violence, the person's ideating, whatever they're ideating. Let's take away the property. Just this one kind of property, not the other kinds of property with which they can also perpetrate harm. But we've completely glossed over the problem. What's the root here? Why did they even get to the point where they're ideating whatever we don't like them to ideate? Oh, we're not asking that question. We're not putting resources behind that. We're not writing that into law. No, just take their shit, right? It's dumb. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We've gotten like an hour and a half now, and that's usually what we schedule these things for. So, any last words before we go to takeaways, guys? I guess we're going to takeaways then. This is our first live stream, and we had a couple of viewers, which was really cool. Eddie got some kudos there too. Thanks from Warsaw Patriots, and you've made a major impact in a lot of people's lives and continue to help people. It's really cool. So we are doing some really good work, and it's very good. So I'm gonna go around the horn here. We'll let Lara conclude. Usually what we do is we do takeaways, like what's one thing that jumps out at you that you want to take with you and ruminate on or share with others. So let's start with Mike. Mike, what's your takeaway today?
Well, my takeaway is going to be a little bit of a commercial for the Liberal Gun Club. I absolutely love what you guys do. I think it's super important to have organization like this out there. Anybody that's listening that has had, I have brought friends into the 2A community, and they have gone in the comments section of certain influencers' posts and been like, no, I can't mess with you guys. Like, I can't do that. Okay, this is then your breath of fresh air. Like, go to the Liberal Gun Club website, check these people out, see what they stand for, and maybe that's your way to get back into this and say like, okay, this is cool, I can get behind this. My takeaway is we need to have more conversations like this. Lara, I think you're an asset to the 2A community. It's a shame that I feel like you're underutilized with your expertise and the things you bring to the table. I believe that you are checks and balances for many things, when certain groups go off the rails. Thank you. I just want to thank you for everything you do.
Eddie, what are you taking away? Other than compliments from the audience.
That's my fake account.
Eddie, are you Warsaw Project?
Warsaw, the checks in the mail. Laura, it's kind of like piggyback off of Mike. I just want to thank you for your time today. I think it's important. we need the bulldog groups out there that we all know who they are, like the cold dead hands. Like we need the people that will not give an inch. We also need like the surgical specialists like yourself and other groups that like, are more nuanced, because that's how we actually get people out there. I mean, my takeaway from this is kind of just more on that you like, guys, these situations are not black and white. You have to be able to see beyond your own nose in this. There is nuances to these situations, and they're not fun. It challenges your own beliefs to like be able to go, well, man, maybe I'm not 100% right on this, and changing your beliefs is hard. But like when it comes to this is how we actually get change, and the change is not going to come from the top. It has to come from the bottom. And outside of that, guys, I know this is a live stream. We're almost at Christmas, so Merry Christmas, guys, if you celebrate. If not, Happy Holidays.
My takeaway is something I think I came in with, but has been reaffirmed, which is we have more in common than we do different. And I appreciate the discussion. Brandon, what are you taking away?
First, just want to thank Lara for being on here. I actually learned something today, and that was about in the 4473 forum, just some of the mental health questions. I myself have struggled answering some of those just because I have an anxiety diagnosis. I take medication for it. And several years ago, before I was 18, I was in the hospital. So like I've actually struggled myself answering some of those questions. So I appreciate you confirming that I'm not a felon. But I think my takeaway for today is just, there was a conversation earlier about how like when you run for law, you can't really do as much work. But us, like the organizations that we do, we're the ones that we can actually stay and we can do all the work. And I think there's just a ripple effect in that, like just doing like this podcast, for example, or when you make some sort of social media post, it might not get a lot of likes, but I've noticed that I have a lot of people that, like for both the left or the right, that send comments just asking me questions. And, just by doing stuff like this, we're reaching out to people. And even, just I can attest to myself, if it weren't for Jake and Mike, and putting these podcasts out, I wouldn't be here. So I just think it's reaffirmation that, we're doing what we could be doing. We're doing all that we can be doing.
I love recruiting converts. Kevin, what's your takeaway?
I
Master
think
producer.
obviously an amazing conversation, but my main takeaway is I assume everyone has different political beliefs and ideas and disagreements, yet we just had a valuable hour-and-a-half conversation and agreed on a lot of things and didn't have to stop because we disagree on one thing.
That is a good takeaway. Credit to Ghost Tactical for pointing that out too. DB?
Yeah, I think similar to what others have said for sure. I mean, the idea whenever we get drawn into an us versus them conversation or push, we need to be really cautious in that moment. There are times when it's time to put your shoulder to the wheel and push, for sure. There are absolutely times for that, but we ought to be really, really intentional about that and recognize that when we do that, stuff's going to get missed. Like we have to recognize that whenever we go into that tribal mode, it better be to defend the village from a very, very real threat that is right outside, with pitchforks and fire. And if it's not that moment, it's probably time for just to pause a moment and look at this. That there is probably, and almost always is, at least a third or fourth or 17th other team that also has a reason for making that, who may have a reason for making this kind of a polar issue. So takeaway from that is we really could do a lot better. We think that we're an evolved society. We think that we are so highly educated and elevated, and we're usually just kids in the playground. And who wants to be that for the rest of their life?
Hey, wrap us up.
So first, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you and Mike and everybody on the team. It's always great to get to talk with you guys. It's always, I'm sitting in a room talking with my friends. And I so appreciate that. I appreciate the time we get to spend together. And I really appreciate having the experts to talk to. And I think my takeaway from this is we need more time with the experts and less time with the people who are trying to tell us what our tribe is. We need to actually go into those rooms where you're uncomfortable. Go into those rooms where you're not the smartest person in the room, because you're never the smartest person in the room. go in and be open and have those discussions. I mean, I was an anti-gunner, and there's a whole long origin story and to that. But if I'm here now, I'm the example of your opinions can change and your thoughts can change, and you can really, once you start learning it, you can really, things are going to seem different. And for the laws, even when they're well-intentioned, they haven't gone to the experts. And so it's going to be up to us, the people like those of us sitting here who are like, we don't want to run, we want to do the work. It's going to be up to us to go into those rooms with the experts and start learning what we know from each other, and stop worrying about what tribe are you, but what can I learn from you?
I'm excited to hear the origin story. So on next episode of Ask a Lawyer.
No. Let's do it now. We're going along, boys. We're going along.
That's awesome.
I'll do it. I mean, if you guys want to keep going, I'm happy to tell it. My husband is a Marine, and I was full anti-gun, grew up kind of very typical upper middle class, not firearms family, East Coast. And when we got married, I was really uncomfortable with having firearms in the house at all. I also have anxiety. I have some mental health issues, and that also played into how does this work, because I don't know anything about that, right? I'm not a firearms person.
On the 4473?
No involuntary treatment. But so, but I was very much guns are bad, guns are dangerous, guns will get you harmed. And my husband said, look, the arguments you're making, you're a lawyer, you're really smart, you understand this, but the arguments you're making aren't technically sound. Like, you don't even understand how the firearms work. You don't understand what it's like to use one. Go take a couple of lessons. I am not trying to change your fundamental thinking on firearms and the value of them. I just want you to understand the technical part of them, because you're making technical mistakes. Okay, fine. All right, fine. I have to go do that. So, but you're not teaching me. He's like, yeah, no, I am not teaching you. And so I went and I found a female firearms instructor. And weirdly, I bought a gun because I wasn't comfortable using rental guns. I was like, nah, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have my own. I can always sell it. And I bought my own. I bought a Mark III. And I went out to the range, and I was terrified. I mean, truly terrified the first time. And by the end of the hour, I absolutely loved it. I was like, oh, this is empowering. This is fun. I'm good at it. Why did no one tell me it was fun? That was the start for me. So then I was like, okay, I can do this. I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to take some more lessons. This isn't so bad. I don't know that I ever want to get really into the community, but I want to learn. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more. And I started Googling, and I got into, I won't say the name of the group, but I found one of the groups that is kind of known to be one of the cesspits of the 2A community, and went, oh my God, no, I'm not doing this. I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm never touching this gun again. And I said, there has to be liberals who own guns, right? My husband's pretty liberal. I have other friends who are liberal that own them. There must be. And so I Googled liberals and guns and women in guns, and I found Girl in a Gun in the Liberal Gun Club, and got involved with both. And when I started going to things with Liberal Gun Club, I realized oh, these are people like me. But their whole focus isn't just, you have to defend yourself, hypothetical thug. This is, let's go out and have fun. Let's go shoot. I'm going to teach you how to shoot a shotgun at clay that's flying across in front of you. That's hard. That's a hard thing to do, but it's really, really fun. And so I got into it because I found out it was fun, and I found out it was empowering. And I think that's something in the 2A community we need to start telling people. 99.99999% of what we do is we go shoot clay or targets or go have some sort of fun at the range. Yeah, our self-defense and our rights are really important, but the day-to-day of owning a firearm is, let's go do something fun. Let's go demystify it. And so that's how I got into it.
That's awesome. And I'm
Laura, I got to get a muzzleloader in your hand. Sorry to talk.
Oh, yeah, no, I love them.
Love them. Cool, because that's my bread and butter.
I shot a whole 2-day black powder class in October. Absolutely love them.
Welcome to the Holy Church of Black Powder. You are now a member.
Who's the deacon? Are you a deacon? Deacon of the Holy Church of Black Powder?
I am the God.
Oh, okay. Well, and on that note, and we have a new nickname, I'm sure.
Yeah, Lara, where do they get a hold of you? Where do people get a hold of you or the club? And
yeah,
I was getting there, man.
We are theliberalgunclub.com. You can check out our webpage. We're on Facebook as the Liberal Gun Club. I think we're on Twitter. I'm not sure actually for Twitter anymore or X. We're definitely on Insta. You can come talk to us. You can talk to us on our social media pages. You can email the club through that. If you want to email me, I'm Lara, Lara, at theliberalgunclub.com. I'm happy to talk to people. If you want to talk to me more, if you want to talk to me more about how do I get my liberal friends to hold a firearm? What do I talk to my liberal friends about? How do I not alienate them? Or, wow, like I have this friend and I think they want to learn, but they're really scared. What do I do? Happy to talk to everybody about that kind of thing.
On X, you are Liberal Gun Club, all run together. No the.
Yeah.
Laura,
right,
thanks for being on here today.
Now can I close out? Do I get to do this now? I was going to get there. I was going to ask her. So thank you, everybody. And Lara, tell them where they can reach you, but you already did that. So thank you, everybody. And we're going to be here, Friday. We're going to take a couple weeks off for Christmas, I think. But then turn the corner of the new year, we're going to be doing this every Friday at 8 o'clock. And you can join in live online, I think. So I'm excited for what's coming. Thank you all for a wonderful 2023. Thanks, Lara, for making the time. We appreciate all of our guests. We appreciate our platinum sponsors. And on behalf of the Walk the Talk family, we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.